Welcome to Secrets Unlocked. If you enjoy intimate confessions and forbidden stories, check the private archive linked in the description. Subscribe, settle in, and enjoy the story. Chapter 1. It was not only frustrating, but a little humiliating in a way. Flat sharing had worked well for me for years, but at 32, I was more than ready to be independent. I wanted the freedom to do what I wanted, when I wanted, walk around in my underwear or less if I wanted, basically become an independent guy. I'd been looking around for a place to buy for ages, but the market in the city was out of control. Prices had shot up even more in the last year or two, and after several experiences of finding a place I liked and being hopelessly outbid, I began to worry I'd missed my window permanently. To make things worse, the house I'd been sharing with two friends from work was being sold. It was owned by Dan's parents, and although technically we had rights as renters, I'd been paying friends' rates since I moved in. It didn't feel right to make things complicated, so I'd agreed to move out in the autumn. At the time that had seemed a long way off, but by the end of summer I was faced with the cold realization I could end up homeless. It was in that mindset I met with my friend Samantha for a spontaneous Friday drink. We'd hit it off at a party a few years earlier, but weren't especially close. She was a little older than me, only a little shorter than my 194 cms, glamorous and always immaculately dressed. Most of all, she had her life so under control and was so naturally confident. She always made me feel like the world was a saner and safer place than I usually felt it to be. The relationship had settled into a pattern of a flurry of drinks and the odd dinner at her place, and then nothing for months. I'd always assumed she or her family were pretty wealthy, because the huge apartment she lived in with her brother was in the most expensive area of the city. After some catching up, she asked about my flatmates. She'd never met them, but that was just the kind of person she was. Before I knew it, I'd laid out the whole sorry tale, telling it must have made me show all the anxiety about it I'd been pushing away for months, because by the end of it, I was flustered and even a little teary. Sam came around the table and put her arm around me, which was as surprising as it was welcome. I couldn't remember us ever touching before except for the briefest of cheek kissing, and it struck me anew what an impressive woman she was. And true to character, she wouldn't hear of me going home to eat alone in what I knew would be an empty flat. As she paid up, she told me to order an Uber to her place so she could cook, and as she put it, spoil my boy. When we arrived, the first thing I noticed was the door to Tony's room wide open. It was shockingly empty, although as I recall, there hadn't been that much in there to begin with. I'd always found it a little strange that his door seemed to be permanently propped open, showing a room so tastefully but sparingly decorated it could have been in a seminary. And if I'm honest, I was always a little curious that he never had anything covering his windows either. "Did Tony move out?" I asked, realizing as I said it how stupid it was. "That's a sad story," she said with a wry smile. "Why, what happened?" "He met someone and now he's living with her. I mean, I'm happy for him, but—" "You'll miss your brother being around?" She gave me an odd little look as I said it. Yes. To be honest, I didn't think it would ever happen, though." That seemed an odd thing today, because Tony was an extremely handsome guy. Anytime he'd been there on previous visits, I'd always have to be on my best behavior to avoid staring at him too much. Something he didn't seem to be aware of, because he didn't make it easy for me. His usual house attire was gym gear, like thin running-type shorts and sleeveless tees. And on one memorable occasion, randomly stripping his shirt off while we were having drinks, standing talking to me in the kitchen. Why ever not? He's a gorgeous guy, well-spoken, good job, loaded. Fuck, I'd marry him to be able to live here. It was only half a joke. "What do you mean?" she asked, raising an eyebrow. I felt myself blushing. Maybe that had crossed a line since we probably didn't know each other well enough for me to be making these kinds of assumptions. "Loaded, whatever are you suggesting, Andre?" she asked sternly, staring at me for a few moments. I always just thought, seeing where you live." She let me swim for a moment before laughing at how easily she'd embarrassed me. "Trust me, Tony isn't loaded financially or any other way. This is my place, not his. As you can see," she said, nodding to the empty room. She sighed. "Come with me to the kitchen. I suppose I can spill now he's gone." She soon set me to work, chopping vegetables and pouring us drinks. Once the food was in the oven, she took some snacks, and we settled into the huge sofa in the equally huge living room. "Tony isn't my brother," she said flatly. I didn't quite know how to process that. "Oh, sorry, hadn't she told me he was the first time I met him. I used to call him my little brother, but it wasn't literal, at least not in the way you thought it was. We had an arrangement." She could see the questions written on my face, I suppose, because for the first time she began to tell me her background. She was an only child, and older than I thought, nearer 50 than my own age. Her parents had both died when she was in her 20s, tragic, but leaving her independently wealthy. She'd had many who pursued her, but had always mistrusted their motives. Given her looks and wealth, I could understand why that might be. And then she asked me something unexpected. "Do you know what solosexual means?" "Someone who enjoys self-play more than sex with others." She looked as surprised by my immediate answer as I had been by the question. "How on earth do you know that?" I felt myself blushing again. I've dated some really great guys, but somehow when it comes to the sex part, it gets awkward and there was the eyebrow again. And I realized I don't really need physical contact that way when I can do it better myself. I finished lamely. She sat there for a moment, her eyes oddly intense on mine. "Maybe that's why I've always enjoyed your company, Andre. Not just because I know you're not interested in me as a woman, but as a person. Maybe I sensed we have something else in common, too. I enjoy men's company, and I sure enjoy being around the ones who are nice to look at, too. But I don't need all the psychodrama and the little games that go on when it's starting to become more than that. I'm used to my independence, and most men don't seem to know how to handle being with someone who has more money than they do and is used to calling the shots." Sam had always been someone who did that. Her general demeanor was always one of a person used to telling others what she wanted and how she wanted it. I guess I was the kind of guy who was happy to let her decide where we'd have drinks or be summoned to her place at the last minute. She was sitting nursing her drink, still giving me that look. It made me oddly uncomfortable, so I seized on the subject I hoped would break the silence. "So what did you mean about Tony?" She stared at me blankly. "You said he wasn't literally your little brother. Is there another way?" She gave a short, sharp laugh, snorting very un-Sam-like into her drink. "Oh, Andre." The smile faded from her lips, and she began to tell me how they'd met. 3 years earlier in some kind of online chat group she was in. They'd started private messaging outside the group. Finally, they'd met up. She realized she'd enjoy someone around the apartment, and he needed somewhere temporary to stay. It was fun for a while, easy the way things should be between friends, right? But then things shifted. I think it was his attitude I noticed first. He was challenging me about the way I do things around the house, when I'd have friends over. And I noticed he was spending an odd amount of time walking around in a towel. That room's bathroom is right across the hall, yet he couldn't seem to avoid coming to talk to me like that, or getting himself a beer before or after his many showers. That progressed to him parading around in his underwear half the time. "Not when I was here, damn it," I burst out. "Well, you actually got closer than you think there, Andre." She laughed again, more quietly this time. Unwilling to interrupt her, I let that rather strange remark go. It was obviously deliberate, and I suppose not surprising considering how I met him. He thought he could get me interested in him with his buff body, which was impressive, I know. "Sorry, how you met him?" "Okay, Andre, if I tell you this, it's in absolute confidence," she said. The stern look apparently real this time. Of course, I swore to keep her secret. Pretty much by accident, I found this small chat group. A lot of them are pretty random, but this one seemed to have some actual real people in it. I got more and more interested, and I stayed. It was a group for submissive men. I was one of the very few women. I'd never interacted directly with Tony, but I'd seen some of what he posted, so I knew pretty much what he was into. So it wasn't entirely a surprise when one night he came out to the living room, trying to get my attention as I sat right here. That was a line he shouldn't have crossed, so he didn't get the reaction he was hoping for. My head was spinning at this. Sam into this kind of dynamic, Tony acting like that right here where I was sitting, I had to ask. "So what did you say to him?" I took my time looking him up and down. looked him in the eye and said, "Thanks for reminding me to take the shrimp out of the freezer." And instead of being cocky as he'd been recently, he sort of shrunk before my eyes. It was something my online persona might have said. I felt a little guilty about doing it face to face, though, but I can't help deflating male egos when they're misdirected at me. It reminded me he was only a boy of 25, trying to find his way in life and not really knowing how to interact with women. But I made myself stay stern, because I knew if I didn't break whatever was driving this behavior, I'd have to ask him to leave. I didn't want that either. I made him stay standing there until he explained himself. It turned out to be just as naive and obvious as I thought. He'd hoped it would mean we could establish a different kind of relationship. Well, obviously, I soon put that little dream to bed for him. But as I watched him sag even more, I have to admit I was enjoying his discomfort. Online it had been mostly text, so I was fascinated to see the effects of my words playing across his face in real time. She paused for a moment to crack an ice cube between her teeth as she finished her drink. I asked him why just almost naked. Don't you mean you really wanted to be naked? The poor boy could barely speak, but I made him repeat himself until it was clearly audible. Of course, that's what he'd really hoped, because I'd be so impressed by his body. I had him stand up straight, asked him to do a few poses for me, which admittedly he did work hard for. I saw cocky Tony coming back. I let him stand there for a moment, then looked him in the eye and said, "So get naked, Tony." He gawped at me, a mix of confusion and excitement in his eyes. "Get naked, Tony. Take them off." This time he didn't hesitate and he complied. She put down her glass and picked up one of the discarded cocktail sticks lying on the table in front of us. "You wanted to know why I called him little brother. Cocktail stick was one of the nicknames I used when he needed a reminder of his obligations." Hearing how Sam had so easily taken control of him was strangely arousing, and just made me admire her more. "So what happened?" "Not much. I let him pose for me for a bit and then told him I was going to bed. Another disappointment for him, I'm sure." "But you let him live here all that time afterwards, so you must have had a reason, I guess." "There's always a reason, Andre," she said, wistfully playing with the cocktail stick still in her hands. "I let him stew for a few days, and by the weekend I'd decided what I wanted. He came home from work in the afternoon, and I sat him down here so I could lay it out for him. Seeing him in his work clothes only made me think I was making the right call. He looked more like a model than a building contractor. I'm not made of stone. I told him he could stay as long as he needed, rent-free, because the rent had never been the point. I'd even let him be naked around the apartment, but on my rules and my terms. He looked pretty thrilled, but I probably took advantage of him by making him agree before I told him what they were. Not that he had much negotiating power anyway. This was a side of Sam I never knew existed, and I guess I was sitting on the edge of my seat, because she smirked at me and asked me if I wanted to know what the rules were. "Yes, please," I nodded. Fairly straightforward. I told him he was pretty, but I was never going to be intimate with him. He'd be getting naked often. Not when he wanted to, but when I told him to. He was forbidden to come in my room, ever. He could expect little privacy of his own because it was my place and I go where I like. And generally he'd be expected to do what I told him to. And he just said yes to all of that. Pretty much. Since our talk earlier in the week, he'd done his towel walk a few times. And remember, Tony was basically submissive. I think he figured he'd take what he could get. I could hardly believe what I was hearing, and it was making me increasingly worked up, even if I couldn't quite work out why. Sam smirked at me again. He was looking way too comfortable sitting right where you are now, and I wasn't sure he really understood I meant business. So I told him to stand up in front of me. "Get naked, Tony." He started to comply, but stopped when he saw me laughing. "Am I not doing it right?" he asked, sounding like a little boy. "When I tell you to get naked, just get to it. If I want a show, I'll tell you, just take your clothes off." Like a good boy, he pulled his work gear off quickly. "Time for the first lesson. I'm not your mommy. Pick up your dirty work clothes and put them in the closet in the hall. Those stinky undies, too. I've put a basket in there for you." He did as he was told. Wow, Sam, I never had any idea, not for a second. I always thought he just looked up to his big sister. He was pretty much in awe of you. But this is pretty unexpected. I get what Tony got from this, but what about you? She looked at me for a moment. You seem to be enjoying hearing about it, so why don't you tell me? What did he get from it? Well, I guess he was basically one of those guys who know they look good and love showing it off to get a reaction. He was an exhibitionist, yeah, or at least for women, she said flatly. And even if he didn't get you, he got that and free rent too, and a beautiful woman to tell him what to do. She crushed another ice cube in her mouth. I had an idea you'd get him, but what about me? Well, I'm assuming you liked having a toy to play with, and who wouldn't even if he was a cocktail stick, she said, standing up. On your feet, Andre. She led me by the hand to the kitchen and told me where to find plates and cutlery as she busied herself with the food. We chatted about other trivia as we ate, but I was burning to know more about what had happened to Tony. As I helped her clear, I knocked over yet another small container with little wooden sticks. Sam gave me the eyebrow. Clumsy boy, I suppose I can get rid of those now. It's not like they have much purpose anymore. Because you only use them to tease him? I asked. She rolled her eyes. Okay, you really want to hear the whole damn story, don't you? Fine. Just don't blame me if I shock you. Chapter 2. Sam poured us more wine and dragged me back to the sofa. But instead of letting me sit beside her, she directed me to an equally enormous hawker opposite her seat. I want to keep an eye on you while I'm telling you this. She sat back, took a sip of her wine, and let out a deep breath. So where did we get up to? Get naked, Tony, I said, feeling how strangely erotic those words felt in my mouth, and seeing that image of him again in my head. That's right, and he didn't have to be told twice, not that time anyway. I kept him that way the rest of the night. Nothing much happened, but I have to admit I was enjoying seeing him walking around more than I expected. He may not have been a big boy up front, but the rest of him was pretty outstanding. She looked at me, but before she could ask, I kept my voice as even as I could to tell her I knew what that was. When he came home from work the following day, I was waiting at the door. I wanted to see if he'd gotten how this was going to work. Take your clothes off, Tony. He started to complain about the day he'd had and how much he needed to shower, taking a step toward his room. I realized he needed to have it spelled out to him how this was really going to work. I grabbed his wrist and dragged him to where you're sitting now. But when he went to sit down, I stopped him. Having him stand there in front of me like a naughty child seemed exactly what was required. What did we talk about last night? You told me I could live here for free and I can be naked more often at home, right? I loved hanging out with you, by the way. He actually had a grin on his face. You've got it exactly backwards, I told him. What I said was you'll be taking your clothes off when I tell you to, and giving up your privacy, and doing what you're told. That's why I will let you live here rent-free. But why? He asked. He was genuinely struggling to make the distinction. Because you need discipline. Because this is my place and my rules. Because I like having you here but without any misunderstandings about what this is and is not. And because I think we can both get something from it. You just said you enjoyed being naked with me, yes. He nodded. Then you need to take me seriously. What's the rule? Take off my clothes when you tell me to. Good boy, so strip. No arguments this time. He pulled his clothes off quickly and they dropped to the floor. Basket, I said, and he trotted off to the hall closet. Good boy, I said when he came trotting back. Anyway, I laid it out for him while he stood there with his hands behind his back. He'd strip immediately on entering the house. There would be times when I might want to watch him or look into his room, and maybe there'd be more later. As time went on, he learned and submitted easily to the control I found myself wanting ever more of. Despite the wine, my mouth was dry. So when you say he had to strip when he got home, how often? Every single time, of course. I realized it was the best way to remind him and keep him in the right chastened frame of mind. Outside, a buff masculine contractor men and women lust after. Inside, a naked boy whose obedience is the best tool he has to please me. I was practically hyperventilating by now. Tony permanently naked and under orders. Sam noticed me squirming. What's the matter, Andre? Too much information. It's a lot to take in. You know, imagining this guy doing that because you told him to. Oh, you don't know the half of it. Half my friends got the show too. Sometimes I'd have him perform at parties. I ended up taking the clothes closet out of his room and having the door screwed permanently open. Damn, you never asked me to these parties. Ha, well, that was one thing I let him have his way on. He was terrified of other men seeing him naked. But not long before he moved out, his attitude changed for the worst. He started challenging me again. You remember the night you came over and he took his shirt off for no apparent reason. I'm not likely to forget that. I could hardly keep my eyes off him. Fair enough, since you were responsible for it. That seemed as random as the moment itself had. Me, what did I do? I asked incredulously. Such a shame you had no clue, but that was half the fun, to be honest. As time went on, I'd made up more little rules. Didn't you ever wonder why I had these little containers of cocktail sticks all over the place? Did you think I just really liked olives? It was true now I look around. I could see 5 of them just from where I was sitting. Cocktail sticks isn't exactly a phrase that rolls off the tongue or something anyone would say in casual conversation. That was the point. At parties, I'd let him be clothed to begin with. More fun that way. But if anyone said cocktail sticks, I gave him strict instructions he had to immediately take off his shirt. If there was a repeat, his shorts would come off. Most of my friends knew that, so they'd tease him for a while. But that day, it was just the 3 of us. We were in the kitchen and you knocked over that same little glass jar of cocktail sticks as I did just now. Damn, I always wondered why he suddenly just pulled his shirt off and you both acted as if nothing had happened. Not that I minded, obviously. He was eyeing me furiously behind your back, but he could see on my face I wasn't making an exception this time. Rules are rules, right? You only said it once, though. Bad luck for you, good luck for Tony. You mean if you had said it again, he'd have dropped his shorts on the spot. No way you could have pretended to ignore that, and you might have even figured out the trigger. He'd have hated you seeing him, but he'd have gone through with it. Feeling the tension build? Thousands of more private stories are waiting in my exclusive archive. The link is in the channel description. He knew he'd have to answer to me if he didn't. My head was still reeling from all this. Finally, I said, "You really had him well under control, Sam. Great deal for him, too, by the sounds of it." "So why did he leave?" she sighed. "What I gave him was enough for me, but I couldn't give him everything he wanted, a full relationship. So he found someone who would." "Wow, well, that's a waste when he had the perfect deal going on." Sam's eyes opened wider at that. "How on earth do you know what that is?" That threw me and I felt the blood rising in my cheeks again. I came across a site a few years ago, and for some reason it just really interested me. Now I am intrigued. Go on, tell me what you liked about the site you found. She was getting that intense look in her eyes again. Wow, I've never talked to anyone about this before, Sam. It's sort of a guilty pleasure for me. She stayed silent, listening. Good-looking boys in these situations. But why this specifically? If you wanted to see guys, there must be plenty of other places to find that. It wasn't really the guys themselves. So what was it then? She asked with a smirk. I felt my heart rate rising with every question. Well, the fact they were forced into taking their clothes off. I see, so if you weren't really looking at the guys, what were you doing then? Surely not imagining you were one of them. I felt like my face was going to explode, but she wouldn't relent until I nodded. Andre, now of all the things I thought would come out of this conversation, this sure as hell wasn't one of them. You are 100% gay, right? Yes, I said quietly. And yet you presumably sat there fantasizing about stripping naked for women, and not just any women, dominant women. I couldn't look at her. Andre, answer the question, please. Her tone was subtly different than a moment earlier. There didn't seem any point in lying about it, especially after what she just told me. Yes, I did. She said nothing for a few very long moments, sitting back in the chair and taking another sip of her wine. Finally, she took a breath and said, Men will never cease to amaze me. No wonder you were squirming around so much when I was telling you all this. Not just because you were thinking about Tony. You were imagining how it felt to be him. I looked up without saying anything. the silence an answer to her question. Incredible. Okay, let's try an experiment. Stand up, Andre. I hesitated, and she gestured silently for me to get to my feet. Now undo the top button on your shirt. I could barely believe my ears, but I was curious where she was going with this. My hands shook a little more than usual as I complied. Next, again I did as she asked. Next, she said, continuing until my shirt was hanging open. She stood up and walked to where I was standing. Taking my chin in her hand, she lifted my chin to meet her gaze, which was somehow both soft and serious at once. Is this okay? She asked quietly. I trust you, so yes. It was the truth after all. She lifted her hands and I felt the shirt glide from my shoulders and fall to the floor. There's something I've always wondered about you actually, she said. She turned to sit down again, leaving me standing there, more flushed than before. She drained her glass and asked me in the same soft, serious voice. How do you feel now? Embarrassed. And what else? I was lost for words. Let me help you then. You're flushed and red, breathing like you just walked up here to the 20th floor instead of taking the elevator. She was right, of course. I think our little experiment is going excellently, don't you, Andre? She asked. Sit down. For a moment I thought she'd done with me, but that idea went out of my head as she gave a new instruction. Take off your shoes. I didn't need to unlace, but did so anyway. A tiny delay, but I did as she told me. Socks off they came. Stand. I rose again, deciding to ride whatever idea she had to whatever conclusion it may have. Undo your belt. It was an odd sensation feeling my pants loosen around my waist, with my friend sitting right there watching. Unbutton, looser still. Yes, now unzip. My pants hung open. Now pull your pants down and take them off. I pushed them down to my ankles where they sat bunched up. Take them off, Andre. I did as I was told. I stood there, off balance and very aware of the situation. Don't leave your clothes lying there in a heap. Fold them up, she commanded. Because that's what her instructions had now become. Still struggling to believe the reality of it, I folded my shirt and pants as neatly as I could. You're doing great, she said approvingly. One last step. You know what it is, don't you, Andre? I was grateful for the wine I'd been drinking since I arrived because now it seemed inevitable. Off, she said simply. Without ceremony, I complied, adding the final piece to the now neat stack at my feet. Sam sat again silently, leaving me with nothing to do but stand there awkwardly, but I decided to just go with this, whatever it was. I met her eyes when she looked up again. Finally, she said, I'm impressed, Andre. You caught me off guard with how compliant you were, but I still wasn't sure you'd go the whole way. You continue to surprise me, Andre. It just seemed natural, Sam. It is for you, I see that now. Finally, she told me to look at her. I suppose I'm not especially surprised by that, actually. Despite everything that had happened, I couldn't quite process what she was saying for a moment. I tried to slow my breathing, but it was impossible to still the thoughts rioting in my head. It was bizarre and utterly new, and yet it didn't feel wrong either. Tell me how you feel right now, Andre. Don't think, just speak. Vulnerable, exposed, like I'm lit up. You're glowing, all right. Incredibly liberated, seen. Obviously and humbled you want to see me this way. I mean seen for who I am, for the first time by anyone truly seen. You're a poet, Andre. Now go and put your clothes away in the closet like a good boy. You know where it is. And bring back the towel you'll find there too. I dutifully picked up the little pile of clothes and walked to the hallway as instructed. The closet was empty except for a basket on the floor, which I dropped my things into before closing the door. As I walked up the long hallway back to the living room, I caught a glimpse of myself in the full-length mirror, acutely aware of my completely exposed state. She was smiling at me as I came back into the room, but as I went to sit back on the hocker, she chided me. Don't sit bare on my white sofa. You can sit on the floor for now, she said, waiting until I settled myself. So I've been thinking, maybe I have a solution for your living situation. She saw me opening my mouth to speak, but cut me off before I could say anything. Don't talk, just listen. Then you can tell me if I have this right, and sit up on your knees so I can see you properly." I'd been sitting, trying to lessen the feeling of being so completely vulnerable in front of her, but I did as she directed me. "Good boy," there it was again. "So you're out of your flat share in a month, right?" I nodded. "Well, you aren't going to find a new place in that space of time, so you're welcome to move in here for the time being." The feeling of relief that washed over me reminded me of all the pent-up angst I'd been pushing to the back of my mind. "Thank you, Sam," I said a little too loudly. "Hold your horses. There are conditions and rules. And if this works out, maybe a long-term solution too. But unlike poor dumb Tony, you need to agree to it all up front. I respect you too much as a friend, and I want us both to get something from this. So here's what I'm offering. Tony's room for as long as you need it. I don't care if you pay me rent or not. If it makes you feel better, you can. Or just buy the odd bottle of wine, I don't care. And in the longer term, I may be able to get you into one of my investment properties. Not as a tenant, but as a partner, so that in time it could be your own place. I have the means, and I might as well use them to help a friend. Property is about the only market making any decent returns now anyway. How does that sound?" I was astonished and said so. "I don't know what to say. It's a very generous offer." "I haven't finished yet. I said there were conditions and rules. First, the conditions. You'll sign a contract setting out everything we agree to. There is nothing coercive or devious at work here, but let's call it unconventional. And like any tenant, if you breach your contract and don't correct your behavior, I will have the right to void it and throw you out, friend or not. Is that clear?" Her tone didn't leave me much choice but to say, "Yes, Samantha." "Good, now the rules. From what I've seen, you have no difficulty taking instructions. You seem very willing, and it's obvious you're not exactly hating sitting there like that either. Completely exposed." She let that float there for a moment, my posture defying any denial. "If anything, you're more obedient than Tony, which is saying something. I'm not looking for a slave. If I was, he'd still be here. Nothing changes in your life outside this apartment, but while you're in it, you'll follow the rules in the contract. They're simple enough." "1," she said, sitting forward and beginning to count off on her fingers. "When you return home, you'll undress in the hallway and put your clothes in the basket as you just did now. I'm no more interested in you than I was in him, but I'm a visual gal, and I like what I see. 2, the no-clothes rule applies at all times unless I am having company, which is not to say you won't be without clothes when I have people over, but I will decide if and when that happens. Meaning you must trust me to make that call and comply without argument. Trust me, my friends have seen it all before. 3, your door remains open at all times. Since modesty is the only real reason for privacy, our contract makes it rather redundant. You'll find I've had it secured in place anyway. The door on your shower room across the hall does close, but this is purely for aesthetic reasons when I have guests. When you use the shower, the door remains open." She flicked her eyes down again. "I was going to hold off on this one, but judging by your reaction to rules 1 to 3, I'd say you can handle it. So, 4. You will obey my supervision and follow my directions completely regarding your private moments. It's something I expect as a form of tribute to me. So I'd have insisted on it eventually, but we might as well start as we mean to go on." She sat looking at me, giving me the strangest feeling we'd just concluded a job interview. "Well, yes or no, Andre, it's all or nothing. If it's yes, you can move in tomorrow. No, and we carry on as friends as if nothing has changed. Well," she smiled, waving her hand at me kneeling there, "almost nothing." It was a bizarre proposal, but really what did I have to lose? And I couldn't deny I felt more alive than I could ever remember being before. "Yes, please, Samantha." "Good boy. Then there's one final thing you need to do to seal the deal." Shame or hesitation seemed pointless at this stage, so I complied with her instructions. "I've been thinking about what to call you too," she said brightly. "Obviously those stupid cocktail sticks can go, but I want something else for you." She stood up, briefly leaning over. "I was thinking about bullets first or marbles, but I don't want those lying around the house. So buttons it is. You like undoing them when you're told, and these switch you on like a light. A few little dishes of interesting antique buttons shouldn't be hard to come by." "Why dishes?" Sam? I asked breathlessly as she continued to direct me, her presence driving me to distraction. Don't be dense, boy. How else am I going to trigger people into saying the magic strip word? She asked, sitting back down again. You mean like cocktail sticks? I didn't think my heart could beat any faster, but I was wrong. Smart boy, I'll decide a guest outfit for you. I don't allow shoes in the house, by the way. I eyed the heels tucked under her as she sat smiling at me. Your shoes, obviously. Then if someone accidentally says the magic word, you'll strip off your shirt. To start. I can't wait to see Diane's face the first time it happens. She'll have no idea I've somehow gotten a cute gay guy under house rules. When there's company, if you're allowed to be dressed at all, this is the rule. So any of your friends could make me strip off everything. I didn't say my friends Andre, I said company. My friends, your friends, the two guys from next door dropping in for coffee. My friends. I didn't know if I was thrilled, horrified, or both, but it was too late to figure it out now. In that moment, the overwhelming tension finally broke, and I completely lost control. Landlady's rules, Andre. I hope you enjoyed this story. More intimate confessions are waiting in the private archive linked in the description. Subscribe for the next story.